Hello, everyone. My name is Roberto Luis, and today I will be presenting with you all my final presentation. My final presentation is on Inferno by Dante Alighieri, and the reason I chose to do my presentation on Inferno is because I've always actually wanted to read this poem, but I thought it might be a difficult read since it's actually like the translation is in archaic English, and that's something that I still have trouble translating and comprehending. Uh, but this class finally gave me that opportunity to put time aside and do just that. And I found this poem the most interesting read we read throughout the semester because of its depiction of Inferno, which is actually in English is translated to hell. And I actually enjoyed how the author Dante Alighieri he incorporates like Christianity and Greek mythology to tell the accounts of Inferno. A brief background on the author. His name was Dante Alighieri, and he was born in Florence, Italy between May 25th through June 20th, 1265. And he died September 13th or the 14th of 1321. And he was known for being an Italian poet, prose writer, literary theorist, moral philosopher, and political thinker. And mostly what is known about Dante is told by himself. He was married to a woman named Gemma Donati, whom he was engaged to since the year of 1277. He also mentions his father's name of being Alighiero di Berencioni, and his mother was named Bella. And his mother actually died before he was 14, and his father later remarried a woman named Lapa de Chiarissimo Cialuffi, and they had a son, Francesco, and a daughter, Gatena. And he wrote about his early years and how he was a soldier and how he fought against the Ghibellines. And the Ghibellines were a banished Florentine party who were sympathetic to the German Holy Roman Emperor. Dante belonged to the political party of the Guelphs, who were for the Italian Pope. And his political party was actually exiled from Florence. And during this time of his exile was when he actually wrote the Divine Comedy. And the Divine Comedy is actually comprised of three poems. The first and the most famous being Inferno, followed by Purgatorio, and finally ending with Paradiso. He also has a couple other notable works before he actually wrote the Divine Comedy, two of which are named Vita Nueva and Convivio. A brief summary about Inferno is that it is written in allegorical cantos, and an allegory is defined as a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. And the poem actually begins with Dante explaining how he has ended up in a darkened forest and lost the true path. And in my interpretation, this means that Dante has lost his way in his Christian values. And the poem gives me this sense because at the very beginning, it starts off with, while halfway through the journey of our life, I found myself lost in a darkened forest, for I had wandered off the straight path. And Dante, as he begins to walk out of the darkened forest, ends up at the foot of a hill, and he sees that the hill, like when he looks up at it, there's rays of light coming off of it, and to him this signifies the true path. So he begins to ascend it, but he's stopped by three beasts, which are a leopard, a lion, and a she-wolf, and he turns around. So this is where he ends up meeting Virgil, and Virgil is a Roman poet who was a sense of inspiration for Dante, and that's why I believe he incorporated him into his poem. And basically, what Virgil tells Dante is that he will guide him through the nine circles of hell, being limbo, lust, gluttony, greed, anger, heresy, violence, fraud, and treachery. And this journey that he will go through the Inferno will ultimately end up with him reuniting with Beatrice, his love that passed away in life, and basically realign himself with his Christian values and find enlightenment with God again. And just briefly, just to mention a few, such as limbo. Limbo is actually a place where people not necessarily are tormented for their sin, but it's just that they were actually born before Christianity ever existed. So people who were not baptized actually end up here. People that were virtuous pagans, such as Virgil. Virgil actually comes from limbo, and other pagans such as Horace and Homer. And another one that I wanted to touch on is treachery. And treachery basically is people who are traitors. And this is where you actually encounter Satan at the very depth of hell. And Satan is described to be a three-headed beast. And in each head of Satan, in each mouth of it holds the three worst traitors in history. The first being Brutus, and then the next being Cassius. And these two are actually known for um, plotting and taking place in the murder of Julius Caesar during the Ides of March. And the last one who suffers the most is Judas Iscariot. And Judas was known for selling Jesus Christ for 30 pieces of silver. And Judas actually suffers the worst because Dante says that when he looks up at it, he sees that the mouth of Satan is actually like shredding the skin off of him completely. But yeah, that's just a brief background on Inferno and basically his journey through the Inferno and how Dante basically grows through this journey. At the beginning, he feels sorry for the sinners and their eternal punishment, but at the very end, he ends up feeling, that it's all justified. He grows and he learns a lot throughout his journey. And that's just a brief summary about the Inferno. A few of the themes that I would like to cover that were mentioned throughout Inferno are sin and punishment, paganism versus Christianity, and love. So, sin and punishment, I believe, is actually the main theme, and it's the central theme because basically it involves people that committed sin in life who could not repent from that sin, that are ultimately sent to a circle of hell to suffer for that sin, to be punished for it. Then there comes paganism and Christianity, and paganism um, was uh, looked down upon because in Dante's view he was a Christian, so he believed that Christianity was the main religion and the only religion. So it's looked at as paganism, as people who are worshiping false gods. So Dante kind of expressed that by uh, placing characters such as Aristotle, Homer, and Virgil, who actually guides them through hell, and he places them in a circle of hell for them to suffer because they never believed in God and accepted Him as their one and true Savior. It's kind of a way of of expressing His poetic justice as well. And then there comes the theme of love. So love is mentioned throughout by the example of Beatrice and God Himself, because Beatrice actually is the one who sends for Virgil to help Dante and guide him through the Inferno. And it's mentioned that Virgil mentions that his journey is divinely willed, so God is involved in this. God actually doesn't want Dante to turn away from him. He doesn't want him to suffer. So he wants him to realign himself with his Christian values, and he wants him to ascend to heaven and to reunite with Beatrice and be uh, enlightened by God. So I wanted to go back to sin and punishment because sin and punishment, as I mentioned before, I believe is the central theme throughout the Inferno. And the reason I say that is because I actually wrote my paper on this, And sin and punishment was conveyed through the main character, the situational ironies, and the the significance of the number three. So a few examples of that, of those elements and how they convey sin and punishment for the theme of Inferno. So the main character Dante isn't actually placed in hell to suffer for his sin. It's actually, like I mentioned before, a way for him to attain enlightenment and realign himself with his Christian values in order for him to ascend into heaven. Um, but he's used as like a vicarious way. He expresses to us through his words how people suffer in hell. An example of that would be how he describes the people who were lustful in life and how they um, are indefinitely trapped in this storm that they cannot control themselves. So they couldn't control themselves in life. They're evidently trapped in a storm where they can't control it. And that's the ironical situation in that. That's the situational irony in that one. Um, another way, another thing mentioned is like Brunetto Latini, which was one of Dante's mentors in life. And Brunetto Latini was actually placed in the circle of those who were violent. And he was actually violent to God in the form that he and the people that follow him to walk eternally through like this barren wasteland that's being rained upon with fire. Um, because he suffers this is because he um, committed the sin of sodomy, which is a homosexual act. So basically, um, it's actually committing violence against God because the act of sex was meant for procreation. So the situational irony in that would be that he ultimately suffers a violent fire of rain coming down upon him, and to endlessly walk and lament what he did throughout his life of committing this sin. So that's another situational irony in there, and that's another way that Dante expresses that vicariously to the reader, the sin and punishment. Then comes the significance of the number three, and the significance of the number three is actually mentioned throughout the poem, such as in the form that when you read it, the poem is in lines of three. When Dante actually attempts to ascend the hill, he runs into three beasts: a lion, a leopard, and a she wolf. And then when he gets to treachery, the last circle of hell, where Satan is held, Satan is described as the three-headed monster, and in each one of his mouths he holds the three worst sinners: so Brutus, Cassius, and Judas. So that's a way of like how he expresses sin and punishment through the significance of the number three. But those are some of the main themes that I noticed throughout the poem of Inferno, and those are some of the elements that he used to express sin and punishment. That concludes my presentation for Inferno by Dante Alighieri. This is my works cited page for the images that I used in my PowerPoint and for the information that I gave out. I hope you guys enjoyed my PowerPoint. I really enjoyed reading this poem. This is my favorite read. I'm glad I finally got to read it. I hope I gave you guys some information that you might not have known about. But thank you so much for watching.